Kumusta, Texas and all the other states, the 50 states of the United States. Ganun din sa Philippines, sa Australia, sa Canada, sa UK o nasaan man kayo naroroon ngayon. Samahan niyo ako dito sa Usapang Off the Record. I am your host, Aileen Ligot Dizon. I'm an attorney licensed here in the state of Texas and in the Philippines, and I'm the managing partner of the Ligot Dizon law firm that is based here in Bel Air actually, or Houston region. Yan. Mapapanood at mapapakinggan nyo kami every Friday, 9 p.m. Central Time dito sa Usapang Off the Record. That'll be Saturday in the Philippines. 10 a.m. naman yan in the morning. And of course, we are live stream via Roof Chamber Radio Pinoy, Facebook page, and YouTube channel. Kaya like and follow us so you will be notified of our upcoming live shows. So pag merong live show, you will be notified kayong unang makakapanood. So like and follow Roof Chamber Radio Pinoy. At mapapanood nyo rin ito sa YouTube channel ng aming law firm. But anyway, kami rin ay mapapakinggan kung hindi nyo man kami mapanood ngayon dito sa live show. Mapapakinggan nyo naman kami sa Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Pocket Cast, Overcast, and Listen Notes. Yan. If you are joining us ngayon dito sa live show, you may post your comments, your shoutouts to your friends and family all over the world. At yan ay syempre babasahin natin during the live show. At kung kayo naman ay may katanungan, you have questions related to our topic for today, you may post your questions and we will read them during the show and we'll try to answer as much as we can those questions. So make sure you post them during the show. Ayan. And of course, our topic for today, it's actually a series of no, topic regarding divorce. Because, here in the state of Texas, I practice divorce. So I'm a divorce attorney here. Apart from being a divorce attorney, I also practice essay planning, probate, family laws, basically. So that's why I'm doing this series of a divorce topic. Pagkatapos nito, we will start inviting again some guests, the mga Filipino-American attorney na kilala natin o maaabot natin para makasama natin dito sa show katulad ng mga ginagawa namin previously before I started this series of divorce talk. So today, ang episode natin ay related pa rin sa divorce, but we will focus on characterization of properties. If you were with us last week, last Friday, we talk about divorce, but we focused on child custody, yung custody battles, and of course we talk about yung standard possession, kung ano ba tong standard possession standard possession dito sa Texas. Because remember, divorce is a state law, so it's governed by the state law. So our state law here in Texas may be different from other states, like California, New York, and so if you are based outside Texas, and you are securing a divorce, or you want to know about divorce, it's always best to consult with an attorney who practices divorce in your jurisdiction, and that goes with no in the Philippines as well. Well, Philippines don't have divorce law. They started, and I think they have started another one. So we'll see what's gonna happen, because I although walang divorce sa Philippines, if the Filipino spouse will go in another country, like for example, will go here in the United States and will secure divorce, and divorce is valid here, so he or she can get a divorce decree here, but of course that's not going to be recognized in the Philippines unless of course the spouse who filed it is a foreign national. So kaya kailangan alamin ninyo yun, although walang divorce sa Philippines, that doesn't mean hindi nyo it's not important to know the laws about how it works if you secure a divorce decree outside the Philippines, and who secured it, and what will be the effect of that divorce in the Philippines, or is there any, or what do you need to do to have it recognized? So that's why it's important then. Okay, all right. So let's go to our topic now. So Do'n sa ating ano, pinag-usapan kanina, we said that, we're gonna talk about, divorce and characterization of property. When we say characterization of property, pag-uusapan natin yung ito bang property, separate property ba ito or community property? So, and why is it important for you to know whether it's a community property or separate property? And of course, kaya nga, it's related sa divorce because importante yon when it comes to divorce, and you are talking about division of property. And we're going to talk more about that later. So today we will learn how why is it important to know whether the property is a separate property or community property, and also we will discuss what are the properties that are considered community property para alam nyo kung ano yung paghahatian ninyo, pagdating ng oras and if you are undergoing a divorce. And of course, how is it going to be divided? How is the community property divided at divorce? So una, alamin mo ano ba yung property dito sa Texas, community separate, and then you need to understand and you need to know what are the community property, and then of course after knowing what are the community properties, you need to know how is it going to be divided in a divorce case. Okay. All right. So let's before by the way before we begin, there's a very interesting line that I just came across when I was browsing, Facebook, internet. Um, and then naalala ko tong ano term na ghosting. If you're familiar with the term ghosting, um, and if you're in the Philippines, you probably already know what I'm talking about. Kasi parang medyo, ano yan ngayon hot topic yan, especially sa Philippines because there's a Filipino lawmaker na who wanted ghosting, to be declared an emotional offense. Yan, parang dito yung emotional, yung meron tayo dito kasing EID, emotional IED, sorry, intentional infliction of emotional distress, yan. So, dun sa Philippines, yun nga meron nga they passed this House bill that declaring ghosting to be declared an emotional offense. So this magandang ano to i-follow. I remember the term ghosting. I can't remember who introduced that term to me, but you can put so many meanings into the term ghosting or use it in different scenario or situation, 'di ba? Sa ghosting, 'di ba, ang alam natin diyan, 'pag bigla ka na lang dinedma or bigla na lang na they stop the communication and you're left hanging like, "Ano nangyari?" Gano'n. So, what's happening? Ano nang nangyari? Tapos wala ka nang narinig, so nag-ghost ka na, 'yun ang sinasabi nila. So, sa practice din dito, sa law firm din, I think nangyayari din 'tong ghosting 'no, when, yung client, consult and then let's say for example, dapat babalik yung client or meron pa kayong unfinished business and all of a sudden, nawala na lang, no communication, no honey-ho, no nothing. So parang dun din nag-a-apply yung ghosting 'no. So it's just interesting. So we'll follow this House bill. What's gonna happen to this House bill? Will it pass as a law or not? So we'll see in the next, I don't know, few days, few months. So abangan 'yan. Alright. So ngayon, let's go to our topic which is actually characterization of property dito sa Texas. And of course, if you are in a different state, you might have a different property characterization process there. But you'll never know the knowledge that you'll gain here. You'll never know when you're gonna apply it, or if somebody needs that information, you'll be able to share it. So yeah, this is just knowledge sharing. It's the purpose is to educate our listeners and viewers, and use it when it's needed. Yeah. Okay, so let's start with the first topic natin, and I'm gonna have to. I'll show you a slide. So let's show it here. Ayan. Okay, so let's start with the topic of community property or separate property, Texas. Right. So, well, if if you have been following our series of episodes related to divorce, we've already mentioned this in the past, that Texas is a community property. Okay, it's a community property state. Ibig sabihin, it matters when it comes to dividing up your property in a divorce case. Okay, because may mga client tayo na may mga clients na akala nila yung kanilang issue is very complicated and difficult to understand yung mga properties nila, and then only to find out 'pag nakausap na nila ang kanilang attorney o 'pag nakausap ko na, then they'll find out na, hindi naman pala gano'n ka-complicated. You just need to know whether the property is separate or community. Kasi nga sa Texas, it's a community property state. So ano ngayon kung community property state tayo, ibig sabihin dito that, if you are married, and you purchase property during the marriage, you're working, so may income ka, um may you acquire property during the marriage. There is a presumption that that property or that asset is a community property. Ibig sabihin, you and your spouse own undivided interest on that sa property na uh, you purchased during the marriage, or you earned, or income you earned during the marriage. Yun ang sinasabi nating community property. Kaya nga importanteng malaman kung community property ba tayo. Kasi yung ibang states, hindi naman ganon. They are not a community property. They don't follow that. Like for example, ano ba yung mga community property state dito? Yung Arizona. California is also community property. Idaho, Louisiana, Nevada, yan. So kung nandun ka sa mga states na yan, nag-a-apply sa yung community property, like New Mexico, yun. Of course, Washington, yan, and Wisconsin then. The other state, then meron din silang, they might not be a community property. They have a different way of characterizing the properties that they have accumulated or purchased during the marriage. So it's important to know whether your state is a community property state. Okay, um, so let's classify this, ang ating separate and community property dito sa Texas. Now, just siguro importante lang masabi natin dito, if you see that, is there any other property na pwede nating ma-identify during the marriage? Well, basically, it's either if it's not community property, then it's a separate property, or if it's not a separate property, then it's a community property. So itong dalawang ito, importanteng malaman ninyo ang difference yan. Because it matters when you are already dividing your assets during the divorce. Wala pa rin siyempre ang tatalo sa settlement agreement, Kapagka meron kayong nagkasundo kayo, if you and your spouse came up with an agreement how to divide your assets. So it doesn't matter anymore whether it's community property, as long as you agreed to that division, then you can do that, because it's we don't have to go through the process of determining whether it's a community property or a separate property. Nasa sa inyo yon. If you want to give your separate property to your other spouse, during divorce, then why not? If you want that, so kailangan lang, of course, you have to agree. So let's say for example, bumili ka ng bahay before the marriage, and then yun ang ginamit din yung bahay ninyo during the marriage. That's where you built your family. Nagkaroon kayo ng mga anak, ng children during the marriage. So, ginawa ninyong homestead yung bahay ninyo, family home. Tapos during the divorce, you'll have to settle anong gagawin sa bahay. So ibig sabihin, kahit na binili mo yan before the marriage, that could be considered separate property. Pero gusto mong ibigay, sabihin mo, okay, I'll give you sa'yo na tong bahay. Let's say fully paid na yung bahay, sa'yo na tong bahay para may matira yung mga bata. You can do that because, you're doing it as a settlement agreement. Ibig sabihin, you don't have to ask the court to divide the property kasi you already have agreed as to how you're gonna divide your property. So, okay lang yon. And ngayon, nagiging importante lang whether the property is separate or community kapagka you will ask the court to, divide the property kasi hindi kayo magkasundo. At some point, you tried so hard already to come up with an agreement and you're still not, getting a settlement agreement, then, ang mangyayari niyan, you will ask the court to do the, division. And that's where you're gonna have to, prove whether the property is community or separate. And of course, there are more to that. It's not just, okay, just because it's community property or just because it's a separate property, talagang, bibigay na sa'yo. So it depends. May mga factors pa rin tinitingnan ng court. That's why it's not that simple if you will ask the court to divide the property for you. Okay, it's always wise that you and, your spouse, sana you can come up, no, you can, come up with a settlement agreement na that will be fair and that both of you will agree. Yun ang ibig sabihin niyan. Alright. So, how will your property be classified, whether it's separate or community? Depende yan sa iba't ibang mga factors, okay? But may mga, properties na we already know they're already separate. And yun ang pag-uusapan natin. May mga properties na madaling na lang ma-identify as a separate or community. May mga properties naman na medyo complicated. And so, yun yung mga, talagang tinututukan kapag you are really going to, dispute it in court. Kung division ninyo, you will ask the court to divide it. So, but, there are properties na, alam mo na, like for example, alam mo na pag binili mo during the marriage, 'di ba? Alam mo na agad it's community property because Texas is a community property state. So, we're gonna talk about, separate property and community property. And the reason why we have to know first the separate property is because, when you go to the Texas law, um, Texas really did not, define, specifically what are community properties. Basta sinasabi lang doon na, all properties that are not considered separate. So ngayon, kailangan malaman natin ano ba yung mga separate property na yon. Para you know now if it's not separate, then it means it's community property. Okay? So, but before we do that, let's pause for a short break and then we'll continue our discussion when we come back. So, stick around.
Hello to everyone from Roof Chamber Radio. I'm encouraging all of you to stay here, stay in this chamber. If you want to be inspired, you want to be encouraged, this is where it's at. And we're all going to need this, especially, in this new year that we're in. We don't know what's up for tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen next week or next month. But I believe that when you gather with people who believe in the power, the faithfulness, and the goodness of the Lord Jesus Christ, there is power in that in itself. So stay here. Stay in the Roof Chamber Radio. Be inspired, be encouraged. And let's all go through life, not on our own, and more than just with each other, but let's speak the faith, let's share the faith, let's live by faith, and let's walk by faith. God bless you all, everyone from Roof Chamber Radio.
And we're back. Nandito pa rin tayo sa Usapang Off the Record. At kung kayo ay kasama ko sa live show, magandang gabi sa inyo if you're here in the United States. At magandang umaga naman if you're in the Philippines. And if you're in Australia, magandang tanghali naman. Nakalimutan ko palang bumati kanina, no, kaninang, start ng show. Kasi sabi ko, let me try to, babati nga ako sa Pangasinan. So, kamusta kilatan? Yan, no, sabi ko na nga ba, makakalimutan ko na naman. That is so funny because, I was just talking to my sister a while ago. Sabi ko, sige babatiin kita ng sa Pangasinan, sa Pangasinense. So pero, hintayin ko muna siyang bumati sa akin ngayon saka ko siya babatiin. But anyway, alright, we're back here and we're still talking about divorce and, we're talking about characterization of property and I wanna discuss, yung kanina, yung sinabi natin na Texas is a community property. states. So whatever earned, purchase, acquired during the marriage, the presumption is that is a community property. Um, and or all properties that are not separate property, there's a presumption that it'll be a community property if you are a married person. So now, gusto nating malaman, ano nga ba itong mga separate property? Tama lang ba na, okay, pag binili ko yan, anything na binili ko before the marriage, yun ang aking separate property. Puwede ka bang magkaroon ng separate property din during the marriage? Yes, puwede. Kaya nga that's why we're gonna talk about that para mas malaman niyo ang ano, mas marami kayong ma malaman tungkol sa separate property na hindi lang ito properties na binili, before the marriage or you purchase before your marriage. Okay, so let's, show that slide again, and let's look at the separate property here. Ayan. So, separate property, katulad nga sinasabi ko kanina 'no, any property or all properties that you own before your marriage, that those are your separate property. Kasi binili mo 'yun, hindi ka pa you're not married yet, eh. So, you don't even know if you're gonna get married, so you purchase it. Bumili ka ng bahay, bumili ka ng kotse, bumili ka pa ng bahay ulit, ng another bahay, you know. So, if you purchased that house before the marriage, then that is your separate property. Okay. Now, ano pa ba yung puwedeng mga properties, na could be classified as a separate property? Nakalagay dito, properties bought using separate funds. Okay? So, I want you to think about this na, let's say for example, kasal ka na, you're already married, or nagpakasal na kayong mag-asawa. And then, bumili ka ng properties during the marriage. So, ang presumption, that is already a community property kasi you purchase it during the marriage. Pero naman, when you purchase it during the marriage, ang ginamit mo pambili, yung separate property funds mo. So, ano ba tong separate property funds? For example, um, meron kang bahay dati ano, yung binili mo yung bahay mo before your marriage. So, separate property mo yon. And then binenta mo yon, and then you kept the funds, yung pinagbentahan ng bahay mo, okay? Ngayon, during the marriage, bumili ka ng bahay at ginamit mo yung funds na yon. So, you used your separate property funds. Kaya kahit na binili mo yun during the marriage, it will still be considered separate property mo. Kasi nga, you purchase it, even though you purchase it during the marriage, you use your separate property funds. Kaya nga sinasabi ko kanina, just because you purchase it during the marriage doesn't mean na community property yun. There is a presumption. Ibig sabihin ng presumption yun yung yung sinasabi ng batas na pag binili mo. Pero, ibig sabihin dahil presumption yun, pwede mo yung baliktarin. You can rebut that using, if you can show clear and convincing evidence that you use, like this one, your separate property fund. Yan. So, then that will be community property. Okay? So, now, the other one here is, gift, not one, but ito, it's either gift, inheritance, or by will. So, ito naman, let's say, for example, kasal ka na rin, you're already married. Okay? And then, let's say, for example, your parent passed away. And meron kang, let's say namatay yung parent mo, and then meron siyang property, mag-isa ka lang anak. At syempre sinong magmamana noon, ikaw lang yung nag-iisang tagapagmana, o kahit na may kapatid ka pa, so hati kayo, 'di ba? So meron ka pa ring mamanahin from your parent. So yung minana mo na yon, if it happened during the marriage, ay inheritance mo yon, that is considered separate property. So kahit even if you received it during the marriage, it will still be considered separate property. The other one is by will. Oh, okay, let's ganun din if a relative or somebody, not necessarily relative, merong namatay, and isa ka sa mga beneficiaries sa will niya. So, yung ibibigay sa'yo, yung matatanggap mo from the benefits from the will be considered your separate property kahit na natanggap mo yon during the marriage. Okay? So, another one is gift. So, kapag ka regalo sa'yo, let's say for example, so, mag-asawa na kayo 'no, and then meron kang kaibigan na very wealthy o hindi niya alam saan niya po dadalhin ng pera niyo or very, very close kayo at niregaluhan ka ng $50,000, you know. So that is a gift. So that means even if it was given to you during the marriage, it will still be your separate property. So hindi lahat ng natatanggap mo during the marriage ay community property. May mga exceptions. Ito nga yung mga exceptions kaya itong pinag-uusapan natin. Ngayon, halimbawa naman, kayo mag-asawa, anniversary ninyo, 'di ba? And, sabi mo sa ano, sabi ng wife mo, "Naku, anniversary na natin, ano kayang gift mo sa akin na makintab, na nag-ano, na shiny, 'yan, na malaki, shiny," ganyan. So, siyempre alam mo na 'yun, 'di ba, diamond ring. So, ngayon ikaw naman, bumili ka ng diamond ring. Sabihin na natin na siyempre saan ka kukuha ng pambili mo ng diamond ring, 'di siyempre sa sweldo mo, 'di ba? Ngayon yung sweldo mo could be your community property. So, pinambili mo yung community property. So, dapat yung ring in community property, 'di ba? But if it's a gift, niregalo mo yun sa asawa mo during, yung, kasi nga anniversary ninyo, 'di ba? So, that will be considered as your, wife or your spouse separate property. So 'pag nag-divorce kayo, hindi mo puwedeng sabihin, "Oh, yung niregalo ko sa yung diamond ring, dapat hati tayo diyan because that is a community property." Hindi, kasi siyempre niregalo mo sa kanya yun, eh. So kung 'di mo niregalo, 'di community property yun. So that's why it's important to look at the intention when, it was given to you. That's another important, factor to determine when you are characterizing the property. Tingnan mo ano ba yung intention niya? Ano ba yung intention ng asawa ko? Intention ba niya na ibigay sa'kin 'to as a gift o share kami, gano'n. So, pero kung sakali man na ang niregalo naman sa'yo, eh, ah, ano ba 'yun, flat screen TV, eh, niregalo niya 'yun kasi ang intention niya para, magamit ninyo sa bahay. So, makikita mo yung intention. The intention is not really to give it to you. But it's for, common use, 'di ba? So that flat screen could be considered as community property kahit na, akala mo niregalo sa'yo. So that's where the intent will come in. Okay, so, that's why importanteng malaman yun kaya pagka-divorce and we're gonna have to divide the property, yun yung mga tinatanong in terms of, mga property. Yung if you really will dig deeper into the character of the property, yun titignan mo yon mga intentions yan and marami pang iba and we will talk about this as we go along with the today's episode. So, yan. And the other thing here na nakikita nyo is ano ba ito? Recovery for personal injuries. Ibig sabihin separate property ba yan? So pagka let's say na disgrasya ako, nabangga yung sasakyan and then, binayaran ako for my personal injury, eh, yung bayad ba sa'kin, eh, separate property ba yon? Well, we need to understand na hindi lang naman isa lang minsan hindi lang ang binabayaran ka ng for injury, 'di ba? That's because nabangga ka, isa lang yung bayad. So, you have to understand pa kung ano yung mga binibigay sa'yo as damages. But, recovery for, personal injuries na sustained, if you sustain the injury during the marriage, okay, that will be considered as your separate property, kahit na binayaran sa'yo yon during the marriage. Pero there's an exception to that, okay? Kasi sometimes kapagka nadisgrasya ka, hindi ka makakapagtrabaho, 'di ba? So 'pag hindi ka makakapagtrabaho, yung income mo dapat na kikitain mo, eh, nawawala. And remember that income during the marriage is community property. So ngayon, 'pag binayaran ka, naka-recover ka because of your injury and naka-recover ka for loss of your earning capacity during the marriage, yang amount na yon, for the recovery for loss of earning capacity, 'pag you are given or you are awarded of that amount, that amount is not separate property. Although you got it because or you receive it because of your injury, your personal injury, that recovery for loss of earning capacity, that amount that is given to you is a community property. So you just need, if you're not sure, you can always consult with an attorney to understand this kung separate ba to or community property. Okay, so yeah, and that's what it means by recovery for personal injury. So alamin nyo lang you had the injury, it happened during the marriage, okay? And then kung ano man yung mga natanggap mo for because of your personal injury, separate property except for recovery for loss of your earning capacity. 'Di ba? Di ka na makapagtrabaho, so bibigyan ka ng awardan ka ng damages, and then yung award na yon, yun ay separate community property. Sorry, yeah. Okay? So yun lang naman yan. And then the other one here that you see is prenuptial or postnuptial agreement. Bakit yan kasama dyan? Because before the marriage and during the marriage, you can actually come up with an agreement with your spouse as to how you're gonna characterize or determine the ownership of your property or the character of your property. So before the marriage, yung prenuptial or tinatawag nating premarital agreement yan. So you can already agree na, okay, so yung mga separate property ko will remain my separate property, and anything na income ng separate property ko will be my separate property kahit na nag-earn ng income yan during the marriage. O kaya naman lalagyan niyo din sa agreement niya, "Oh, and whatever I purchased during the marriage, I want it to be a separate property." So you can come up with an agreement that you will sign, the both of you, as long as your prenuptial agreement complies with the requirements of the law. Then it can be enforced. Okay. And that could be a separate topic later, yung prenuptial and postnuptial agreement. Now, postnuptial naman is kasal na kayo, saka pa lang kayo nagkaroon ng agreement na you know what, para hindi na tayo magkaroon ng problema later on, just in case mag-divorce tayo. Parang sometimes it's like, it's very odd na pinag-uusapan ninyo yun, But sometimes it helps. It makes it easier kung sakasakali man, but I'm not saying you're gonna, you're gonna file a divorce against each other. Pero sometimes it's part of planning in advance. Okay, so and it's usually ito important kapag yung mga marami silang mga properties, and o kaya nagkakaroon sila ng mga ilang beses na sila nag-divorce, so they become wiser, so they enter into this kind of agreement kasi they've already had experience in the past divorce na maybe it was a messy divorce, and it was messy division of property, so that's why they become wiser, so they enter into postnuptial agreements, and during that so on that prenuptial agreement ninyo, you can agree as to the characterization of their property. Sabihin mo, okay, yung income ko ay income ko lang, separate property ko yon. Yung sa'yo, separate property mo din yon. Pero meron tayong common fund for pay for purposes of paying the bills, ganun, hati tayo. So you can come up with those agreement. Para pagdating ng divorce, you already know which one is which properties are yours, and which properties are not yours. So that's what it means by prenuptial, prenuptial or premarital agreement, or postnuptial or marital agreement. Yan ang tawag diyan. Okay? All right. So yan ang separate property. So anything other than the separate property, sabi ng Texas law, ay community property. Kaya silipin na natin ang community property. But before we do that, ayan, meron lang tayo ditong bumabati. At batiin na rin natin. Let's show it. Si Rochelle Ligot da Seco. Good morning, sis. Pa-shoutout po Zorobio, Pangasinan, and the Seco family sa Occidental Mindoro. Occidental Mindoro ba or Mindoro Occidental? Siguro tama. Occidental Mindoro yan. Yes, kumusta kilagtan, mga taga Pozorobio? Kaagwan la or tanghalian pa lang, di ba? Or magtatanghalian pa lang. Yan. Okay, salamat, Rochelle, and then we have a question here from Rusty Lopez. Ang sabi ni Rusty, what happens to my properties in a non-community property state I acquired if I plan moving to Texas? Good question. At itong katanong mo na ito ay sasagutin natin as we go to our discussion. What are the community properties? Ano ba 'tong mga community property dito sa Texas? Because we just finished discussing ano yung mga separate property. And we're gonna do that after the short break. So, wag kayong alis, stick around.
Hi, we are so pleased to be with you. Thank you for being with us. We want to invite you to be part of the Difusión Latina, Portal de Fe. We are the Spanish ministry of Roof Chamber Radio, and we are so blessed to be with these guys all around the world. Please be with us on YouTube and Facebook. We would love very much to know how God is blessing you, and please come along and support us. God bless you, and see you then.
And we're back. Dito pa rin tayo sa Usapang Off the Record. We are live here sa Roof Chamber Radio Pinoy YouTube channel and Facebook page. And of course, if you're here, feel free to post your comments or shout out your question, and we will read them during the show. And if you missed the live show, of course, you can listen to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, ano pa ba? Listen notes, yan. Later, yung recorded show natin. Okay, so let's go back and let's show our slides here. So we discussed what are the separate properties here in Texas. So anything na hindi separate will be the presumption is ano yun, community property, because Texas law defines community property as all of the property that either spouse acquires during the marriage, except daw the separate property. Kaya nga we needed to understand first ano ba tong mga exception, which are yung separate property nga, and yan yung ating diniscuss before the break. So and here's a community property. So, Texas community property laws, ina-assume under that, the court assumes that any property possessed by either spouse during the marriage and at the time of the divorce, yung hindi pa nasipipirma ng divorce decree, ay considered community property. That's the presumption. So, if you want to prove that it's not a community property, of course you can do that because it's only a presumption. So that means you can rebut it. But kung ikaw ang nagsasabing, well, this is not a community property, the burden of proof ay nasa iyo to show that it is not a community property. In order for you to do that, you need to show clear, CC yun eh, clear and convincing evidence that that property is not a community property. So doon napapasok yung mga evidence mo, paano mo sasabihin, paano mo papatunayan sa court na this is not a community property. So pag-usapan natin yan later, okay? Sa part na why is it important to know whether it's a community property during the divorce, okay? So well, so ang sabi nga diyan, so nakikita nyo sa screen natin, once you get married, you and your spouses, yung salary nyo, wages ninyo, yan, as long as you earn that from work, from your employment during the marriage, yung income nyo dyan ay considered community property. Okay? Ngayon, yung makita ka dyan, yung income of your community property. So, ano naman tong income of your community property? Let's say, for example, during the marriage, di ba, nagtatrabaho kayo, so meron kayong yung salary and wages nyo, nakadeposit sa bank, tapos nag-withdraw ka, ginamit mo yun to purchase a house, and then you rented it out. So, pinalis mo yung bahay mo. Siyempre because pinaparentahan mo yon, so may income yung property. Yung income na yon, yung bayad, yung rent nung nag-uupa ng bahay mo, ay considered income yon. So yung considered income of your community property. So that means that is also, yung income na yun ay also community property. So it's not just income from your work, but also income coming from your community properties. So let's say for example, bumili kayo ng sasakyan, and during the marriage, so the car in itself is a community property. Tapos ginagamit mo yon for business, like yung Uber drive ka. So kumikita ka, then that will be an income of your community property. So that is considered also a community property. Okay? Okay. Now, the other thing here is nakalagay dito, outright purchase or on credit during the marriage. So the presumption here is that pag may binili ka, kinash mo man yun during the marriage, yung binili mo na yon, community property yon. Ngayon, pagka on credit mo binili during the marriage, the presumption is it still is a community property. But there's more to that later on. It could be more, more not as simple as that. Maybe later on, it depends on if you're gonna show that, oh wait a minute, this is not really community property, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Yung gumamit ka ng credit card, tapos ginamit mo yung credit card na yon to purchase property. The presumption is yung binili mo it's a community property, but because it's a presumption, you can rebut it using a clear and convincing evidence to show proof that it's really not a community property. And yun yung pag-usapan natin in a little bit, okay? So all right. Ngayon, I think I have a quick breakdown here. Wala pala yan. So, I think it's gonna be, oh, I didn't show it there. Anyway, so let's just give you a quick breakdown for the different as to the differences of community versus separate property. So we already know yung separate property is owned by you or your spouse before the marriage, and a property acquired during the marriage by gift, inheritance, and by will. Even though you receive it during the marriage, that is still your separate property. Um, Also, yung property purchase using your separate property fund, even though you purchase it during the marriage, it will still be a separate property. And of course, yung sa award sa'yo sa personal injury mo, if you're awarded because of your personal injury that you sustained during the marriage, then that will be a separate property, except if it's an award for your loss of your earning capacity, then that one is a community property. So pwede mong idagdag yan dito, okay? And of course, we talk about the premarital and the post premarital or prenuptial agreement and postnuptial or marital agreement. Kung nagkasundo kayo to characterize the property as a separate property, then it'll be a separate property. Okay? Now, community property, ito na yon, salary and wages, mo income from salary and wages, from your employers, yan, income earned from any community or separate property during the marriage, yan, pwede yan. Ano pa yun nga, yung outright purchase model, because there's a presumption that any property, any assets that you acquire during your marriage are considered community property. And also, even if you acquire it during the time na nagde-divorce na kayo, as long as hindi pa napirmahan yung divorce decree, yan ay community property pa rin. Kaya sinasabi ko, kapag may pending case na ng divorce, huwag kayong bibili ng property muna para hindi na makagulo yon. So, hintayin nyo na matapos yung divorce bago kayo bumili ng property, so that you know it's not gonna be included in the divorce process, yung separation or division of your property. Yun ang doon. Hintayin nyo na lang. Okay? So, let's, I think, meron tayong question kanina dito eh. Yung question ni Rusty Lopez. Ayan. Let's, okay, there. All right. So, sabi ni Rusty, ang tanong niya, what happens to my properties in non-community property state I acquired if I plan moving to Texas? So, let's say, for example, galing ka sa state na hindi community property, okay? Let's say hindi sa yung mga hindi sa nabanggit ko. Let's say Tennessee, galing ka ng Tennessee. And then meron kang property doon sa Tennessee. Let's say you're already married, in Tennessee. You, of course, you already accumulated wealth, you purchase properties, and then sabi nyo, you know what, parang mas magandang tumira sa Texas. So, mag-move kayo sa Texas ngayon. So, anong gagawin nyo dun sa mga properties niyo sa Tennessee? Di, bebenta nyo yun, di ba? So, ngayon, yung let's say for example, yung property doon sa Tennessee, di ba hindi kayo community property, let's say Tennessee is not a community property. So, yung property doon, kung ikaw bumili doon, separate property mo yon, di ba? So, ngayon, binenta mo yon sa nakasya, naging na yon, na-liquidate na yon, so may pera ka sa bangko. Ngayon, lumipat kayo dito sa Texas. And then siyempre bibili kayo ng bahay dito sa Texas. Ginamit mo yung ano, yung fund na yon na napagbentahan ng bahay niyo doon sa Tennessee, okay? So pagdating dito, so bumili kayo ng bahay, yung bahay na yon does not necessarily mean na community property mo yon. Although binili niyo yung mag-asawa during the marriage at ginamit niyo yung pera ninyo na pinagbentahan ng bahay sa Tennessee, 'di ba? So, mangyayari, 'pag nag-divorce kayo, we'll have to look into the character of the property. We have to characterize the property whether it's a separate or community. So, titignan mo ngayon yung fund na ginamit mo. Was the fund used to purchase the house at the time of the marriage a separate property? Because if it is, then it becomes a separate property. Yung bahay nyo ngayon dito sa Texas will be considered separate property. So it will definitely affect the division of your property during the divorce process dito sa Texas. So that's why it's doon papasok yung mas a little more complicated, not so much maybe, but a little more complicated of determining whether your house is a community or separate property. Or it could also be partially, 'di ba? Depende doon sa fund na ginamit ninyo. Kung yung fund na yon let's say sa state na pinanggalingan ninyo, common law kayo, so 50-50 kayo, 'di ba? Tapos syempre binenta niyo yung bahay niyo doon sa from other state. Tapos yung napagbenta na yun ang ginamit ninyong pabili ng bahay dito sa Texas. So, because the character of that fund ay meron kayong separate hati kayo 50-50. So ngayon yung binili niyong bahay will not be considered as community property but partially half or you have an undivided ownership doon sa bahay. Hati kayo. So, yun lang naman papasok lang naman yung complexity na yun kapag hindi kayo magkaroon ng settlement. Hindi, it will not be an agreed divorce. Yun yung pagka papunta na kayo sa court and then you will have to prove kung kaninong property yun dapat mapunta. Then papasok yung mga analysis na ganon. So, but that is good question, Rusty. Okay, so but before we continue, let me show you again yung ating slide. Yeah. All right, so we already talked about what ano nga ba tong community property na to, pero there's more to that, hindi lang because you purchase during the marriage a community property na yan. So you'll have to also understand yung character ng property. Kaya nga meron tayong characterization eh. So let's go to that na para I can answer the other question diyan na that posted by by one of our viewers right now. So let's go to this. Ayan. So property characterization tayo and then we will answer that question ha. Okay. So, papasok lang itong characterization of property kapag hindi kayo syempre magkasundo. Kaya ang aim natin sa divorce, sana magkasundo kayo kung paano nyo hatiin yung property sa inyo. Yun pa rin ang the best, an easiest way to end your divorce. Okay? Ngayon, pag hindi kayo magkasundo, saka tayo pupunta sa court. And then, of course, doon na papasok yung whether we have to characterize whether the property is a separate property or community property. And remember, there is a presumption nga dito sa Texas that if you acquire during the marriage, then it is a community property unless you can prove it otherwise by clear and convincing evidence. Okay? So ngayon, okay, so if you see the word tracing here, pag ang property na pinaghatian ninyo during the marriage ay hindi masyadong malinaw kung saan galing yan, pumapasok yung tracing. Let's say for example, bumili ka ng bahay and sa sobrang tagal na, hindi mo na alam kung ano mga ba yung ginamit ko ditong funds, separate property ko nga ba or income namin. So doon papasok yung tracing. Iti-trace mo ngayon yung property kung anong funds ang ginamit mo, kung kailan mo binili ito, kaya meron tayong medyo mas a little bit more complicated process to determine whether the property is community property or separate property. Okay? So ngayon, I'd like you to focus first on this yung sa inception of title. So one way to determine if the property is a separate property or community property is you look into the Inception of Title doctrine. So bali sa tracing, you will look into the separate origin ng property through, of course, yung mga evidence mo, yung mga documents mo, yan, showing the time and the means by which the property was obtained by the spouse or the spouses. Okay, so kasi pagka yung separate property will always will retain its character through, even though paano ba natin sabihin, yung nagkaroon na ng series of change of ownership, ganyan, or exchanges of property. So titignan mo yun, kaya tinitrace talaga yun. Halimbawa, kasi sobrang tagal na, binenta, binili, binigay, binalik, so titrace mo yan. Saan nga ba nagsimula yan? So doon papasok yung, it's either gagamitin mo yung Inception of Title rule, o ititrace mo siya using the funds na ginamit to purchase the property. Okay? So in essence, characterization is only when, you'll need to know, you're gonna look into the paper trail, okay, beginning at the time the property was acquired and continuing to the date of, yung nag-file na kayo ng divorce, towards the end of the divorce, where the judge signed the divorce decree, ano. So to trace mo yun ang tawag natin sa tracing, which is all actually characterization of the property. So now when you say inception of title, pag ginamit mo to trace the character, to determine the character of the property, titingnan mo yung kailan mo na-acquire yung property, kailan ka nagkaroon ng title doon sa property. So you look into it at the time of its acquisition. So let's say, for example, pinakasimpleng example niyan, yung bahay na kailan mo yun binili? Binili mo yon before the marriage or during the marriage? So pag before the marriage and you acquired title to that, then it will be considered as your separate property. So if you follow the Inception of Title rule, okay na bumili ka ng sasakyan, kailan mo yun binili? During the marriage or before the marriage? So yon, Inception of Title. Kailan ka nagkaroon ng kailan mo na-acquire yung property? Time of its acquisition, yung Inception of Title. So yun ang dyan, ang ibig sabihin ng Inception of Title na yan. It's the origin of the title to the property and not, the acquisition. Kasi sometimes you acquired it pero you did not get the title yet, di ba? You did not get the final title yet. So, isa kanila, if you use this one, it's the origin of the title to the property. Kung kailan mo nakuha yun. Kailan naging sa'yo, kailan nag-attach yung title na yon sa name mo. Ayan. I think that's how it is in a simpler term. Okay? So, kasi sometimes the nature of the property is medyo parang hindi na malinaw because it was acquired a long time ago, o kaya naman yung mga nangyari questionable. Marami nang nangyari kumbaga. So now you'll have to determine um if the asset is a community property or separate property. So it would be determined at the time that the asset was acquired and when the title was, when you obtain the title, yon. Na ngayon, the other one is ito yung funds use. Ito naman yon. So it's not always that Texas, it doesn't matter in Texas, doesn't matter whose name is on the title in Texas kasi. So you look into, because why? Because Texas is community property. So you look into, ang gagawin natin nun, you will trace ano yung funds na ginamit to purchase the property, like what I am I just mentioned earlier. If you use the funds, and the funds that when you purchase a property, you use the funds that is separate funds, then the property will be characterized as your separate property. But if if the funds that you use is a community property, then that property is a community property. Like for example, yung car, bumili ka ng sasakyan. Let's say may sasakyan ka na before, bumili ka na ng sasakyan mo before the marriage, may sasakyan ka na, 'di ba? And then nagpakasal ka. So ginagamit mo pa yung car na 'yon. Then during the marriage, binenta mo yung car na 'yon, 'di ba? And then let's say ginamit mo yung pinagbentahan mo doon, ginamit mo 'yon to purchase a new car. if ang ginamit mo to purchase the new car is solely yung napagbenta ng car mo, then if you're gonna use tracing, if you're gonna trace it, and at ang ginamit natin, of course, the funds used, then that new car is not gonna be your community property kahit na binili mo yun during the marriage. It's still gonna be a separate property. Okay? Now, let's say bumili ka ng mas mahal na sasakyan. Okay? So let's say yung old car mo, nabenta mo yun ng, let's say, 10,000. Okay? Tapos bumili ka ng bagong sasakyan. You know? At yung bagong sasakyan na binili mo is, let's say, worth 15,000. So saan mo kukunin yung 5,000, 'di ba? Let's say ang ginamit mo dun na pandagdag doon is income mo, yung pera niyo sa bangko. Okay? Yung pera ron sa bangko na yon, let's say yan ay galing sa salary mo during the marriage. So tinitrace mo yung saan galing yung funds, 'di ba? So basically, 15,000 yung worth ng car. So pag magde-divorce kayo, ang ano doon is 10,000 yung part na yon, part nung yung 10,000 na yon na pinambili mo, ginamit mo yung pinambenta mo ng old car mo, then that will be separate property. Yung 5,000 na yon, so ibig sabihin, may claim yung spouse mo doon sa car mo na bago ngayon kasi partially ginamit mo yung community property. So doon tinitingnan. Kaya di ba sabi ko, it could be a little more complicated depending on the situation, but that's how you do it. That's how you determine or characterize the property, whether it's a separate property or community property. So we can use this, we use this, usually itong funds used, yun ang ano, how we trace it here in Texas. So, di ba, very interesting. Kaya, I don't know, almost time na tayo. Ginaganahan pa akong mag-discuss. So I think there's, we can discuss more about this. But if you are really in a situation right now, and you are anticipating divorce, and you have so many properties na you are not sure whether it's going to be community property or separate property, or it's going to be partially community property or partially separate property, then you will really need the help of an attorney who practices divorce and knowledgeable about this tracing to help you in your the divorce case. So going back to Rusty, ayoko namang sabihin ni Rusty I didn't answer his question. Ito ba yun? Ay, tapos na pala yan. Okay. So, how will the properties acquired during the marriage on credit be divided in Texas? Yon, ito na naman, papasok dito yung tracing Rusty. So, a presumption is, pag bumili ka on credit during the marriage, yun ay community property yung binili mo. Pero then, kapag ka, yun yung presumption, but you can rebut that. How? Pwede mong patunayan na, well, when we applied for a credit card, sometimes, titingnan mo yung other side, yung company. Did the company use only your credit score or the credit score of your spouse or both of you? If the credit card company gave you your credit card and use only your credit your credits kasi nga mas mataas yung isa, hindi maganda yung credits niya, so most likely yung property mo na yon na binili mo using on that credit could be considered as your separate. So depende yon, that's why it's a little more complicated, but that's a good question kasi karamihan sa atin ngayon we buy on credit, diba? We use our credit card. So yon, isa lang naman yun sa situation na isa sa titingnan mo kung paano mo i-determine yung character ng property. Okay? So, ito naman, si Attorney Orly Dizon, may tanong siya. Naku, hypothetical. Sabi niya, Dad gifted his son during the marriage $10,000. Son used that amount to buy and fully paid a boat. But the boat is worth $27,000. Is the boat community property or separate property? Okay, that's interesting kasi remember, if you're gonna apply the tracing here, okay? So alamin mo saan yung funds nang galing, 'di ba? So that gift, ang gift na ito is actually hindi naman gift ninyo sa isa't isa eh, okay? So gift ninyo sa anak ninyo. So 10,000 'yan. Ngayon, bumili siya ng so the son used that amount to buy and fully pay the boat. But the boat is worth 27,000. So I'm not sure kasi 10,000 yung binigay mo, tapos siyempre kulang yon 17,000. Saan galing yung 17,000? Ngayon kung yung 17,000 na yon ay galing sa income ninyong mag-asawa, well, income is community property. So, partly nung boat, merong claim yung community property doon sa boat. So, it's not entirely masasabi ng son mo, "Oh, this is mine." 'Di ba? So, as long as kaya nga papasok dun yung tracing. So, trace mo yun. So, yeah, that's how it works. Good. That's a good question. And we have here Bobby Reyes saying hello. Hi, Bobby. Kumusta na yung adobo natin dyan? Okay. Ito naman si Emmy Ligot. May cousin sabi niya, hello, good morning. Watching from Cavite. Hello sa mga taga Cavite. Magandang tanghali sa inyo dyan. And thank you for joining me today dito sa live show. Ngayon, it's already, we're past our time. Wow! So, napakarami pa nating pwedeng pag-usapan. But of course, dahil time na, we will just reserve it for our next topic sa next episode natin. Kaya abangan ninyo tong series na to dahil it's really, there's a lot to talk about, but of course, it's always the best to consult with an attorney if you are in a situation that you are either anticipating divorce or you are already in the process of a divorce and you don't know what to do. Ayaw mo naman syempre na maagrabyado ka, especially if you deserve it. So you want to make sure na fair and just naman talaga ang division ng property ninyo. So always consult an attorney who could help you in your divorce process. Sometimes it's just simple, you can do it, but it's always better to consult to see if there's more that you can do or you are on the right path. Kasi sometimes a little mistake could cost you much. In terms of cases, hearing or whatever pagka nasa korte na kayo. So as much as possible, come up to an agreement with your spouse. I know that sometimes it's hard to do that, but ganun talaga, yun ang the best solution para hindi naman masyadong magastos at humaba pa yung process ng divorce. Ayan. So, anyway, I hope na nabati ko lahat ng mga naririto. So, sa lahat ng mga kasama natin ngayon, to our audience and listeners dito sa Usapang Off the Record, maraming salamat to the President of Roof Chamber Radio Pinoy, 𝘞𝑩𝘩𝘕𝘠. Salamat, magpagaling ka na agad-agad. And of course, ang Usapang Off the Record is brought to you by Roof Chamber Radio Pinoy and Ligot Dizon Law Firm PC. Yan. I'll see you next week sa isa na namang Usapang Off the Record. This is Aileen. Have a great weekend, everyone, and make it worth it. Bye-bye.